But I think if you have like the right intention, the right culture, that helps people continue to make the decisions at the ground level. That's how you make the things that are the most important stick.
Hi, it's Niki from Conviction, and today we're in the good company of Chloe Mark, the VP of People and Operations at Decagon. Chloe got her MBA from Stanford and worked in consulting at Mckinsey for almost a decade. She made the jump into operating as the head of global operations at Splunk before going early and doing 0 to 1 at Decagon. Chloe's business background gives her a unique perspective on talent. So let's get into it. Hi, Chloe. Thanks for being with us and spending the afternoon with us.
Oh my God, the pleasure is all mine. Thank you for having me.
I'm so excited to talk about all the amazing things happening at Decagon. I know that you all have seen insane growth in the last 3 years. I think you're over 300 people now. You're going to 2.5x, I think, this year.
Hopefully. That's right. Maybe more, maybe less. You never know.
And so tell us, how have you guys been so successful hiring in such a competitive market?
No, I mean, it's been a wild ride. And I joined, just for context, I joined Decagon 6 months ago. When I joined the team, we were 120, I think 130. And then we'll just have crossed, to your point, 300. I think we're going to try to hire over 140 people this quarter alone. So it's been kind of this amazing journey. And a year ago, again, winding back like 2 iterations of me in my time at Decagon, we were, I think, 20 at the beginning of last year. And so think of 20 to 300. So an amazing like growth and trajectory. I think that how do you do that? And I think it's just, when you've got a lot of momentum, it can kind of snowball in a way. I would say one thing the team has done a really good job of is always making hiring the not only number one job of like the talent or the people team, but actually of the entire organization. So I would say our CEO would get up and, Jesse or Ashwin would get up and say, hiring is kind of the number one priority for the whole company. Because when you're growing that fast, how do you actually do that and deliver on that growth? We have to build a great product, but who's going to build that product? Great people. Who's going to sell that product? Great people. So I think, having an amazing talent bar and pool has always been like foundational to us.
Tell us more about what that looks like from Jesse and Ashwin.
I mean, I think it starts just, we have a pretty clear cadence and rhythm of like how we talk about and priorities of the company. So like talent and hiring is always kind of top of mind. It's something we're reporting out and talking about. But I also think they just like walk the walk in that they're super involved. I think in most key hires, they're in most of our closing channels and discussions. They will pick up the phone and talk to any candidate. And so I think just by role modeling that, that's really how they're like living that as well. We've also just invested a lot in kind of the people and talent infrastructure to make sure we're able to deliver on that promise. And yeah, we just expect everyone to spend, I think, 30 to 40 to 50% of their time hiring their team, which is no small feat when you're trying to grow this fast and sell and do all the other things we have to do. So
definitely not. I mean, building at this scale, things break.
Yeah.
What does that look like at Decagon, and how are you and the team like facing these challenges?
I was saying to the team, they were asking, how much can we hire? I was like, you probably can't onboard more than 50% of your own organization in a quarter. Like just if you think about how that works and how things break, I think first and foremost is just an understanding that things are not always going to be perfect as we're doing that. And so we kind of have to have the framing as a team that we're all here, we're here to win, we're learning. And by the way, like Decagon, the Decagon you're with didn't exist a month ago, and it was different a month ago from there. And so I think there's just a general like humility and kind of openness in the culture around like, hey, we're going to learn as we go and try to get ahead of things. But just whenever you're going this quickly, you have to know that things are not going to be perfect all the time.
Yeah.
And then what breaks? I mean, the things that are like, there are certain things you can get wrong, and then there are certain things you can't. It's like there are doors you can walk through and doors you cannot walk back out of. And so it's really important that you get the important ones right. Yep. And for me, that's maintaining the talent bar. Like the thing that we cannot break, right, when you're scaling is we cannot lower like the talent bar of people that we brought in. We have to continue to bring in world-class people. That's because great people want to work with great people. 10Xers will actually excel at their company, people who are going to drag down the organization. So those are the things I think we've held really quickly to. What are other things that break as you're scaling that quickly? I think it's just, when I think about Decagon, I think about how we have like the product market fit of like a 5 to 7 year old company, but we're a company that's really existed. I mean, you said 3 years, but like really 18 months. I think if you think about like market traction.
Yep.
And so in that, like, things that didn't matter when you were 30 all of a sudden become really important. Like an example is, we don't have like explicit levels as a company that we talk about, but when all of a sudden you're at 30 people, okay, how do people report? And, what are the org structures? And, what is my role relative to somebody else? That doesn't really kind of matter on the day, but all of a sudden it matters a ton when you're at 500 people and you're trying to help people navigate how to fit through the org. Other things that happen at that scale, communication becomes all of a sudden like so much more important. Somebody used to stand up and say, hey, I'm getting pizza. And by the way, now we're doing go-to-market we're now selling a different product. That was like the extent of how you did change management. Now we have to be much more intentional about how we like communicate and cascade things. There's also just like other funny things that happen. Like we just took the whole team on an offsite to Hawaii. This is one of my favorite stories, which was sort of this big expense. And like the lore from that offsite to Hawaii is a year ago, we had promised the team, hey, if we hit this ARR milestone, we'll take the whole team to Hawaii. By the way, when we made that commitment, it was 20 people.
Yeah.
And they're like, yeah, we can probably like take the whole team to Hawaii. All of a sudden, we hit the milestone, we blow through it. We're over 100. We're like, wow, it's going to be a big amount of people to take Hawaii, but we want to take the whole team. By the time we're actually going on the Hawaii offsite, all of a sudden it's 250 people. I'm navigating, taking 250 people to Hawaii. It's not like a fun thing. Let's all book our tickets online. Let's like do these things. So I think a lot about, again, those are all things that like break is the wrong word. They're just not, that model doesn't work as much as you scale. But I think if you have like the right intention, and we'll talk about this too, like the right culture that helps people continue to make the decisions that you would want to be making, that you yourself would be making. Are they actually then making those as kind of at the ground level? That's how you like make the things that are the most important stick. That's all.
What are the challenges that you think are going to come up as you 2.5x a team this year, or as you grow? Like, what are the challenges that you will face that will be different than the ones that you just tackled?
I just think when you're in that level of growth, you're in a constant state of reinvention. You're just the company itself, what could work for 0 to 100, what can work for 100 to 300. All of a sudden it's like, okay, this process isn't going to work anymore, and like we can't scale this way. I also think in some ways the challenges are the same, but it's like you're kind of reinventing the system each time. And like, we dealt with it today. Like we were sort of wishy-washy on certain policies on how you can get equipment, and so we just have to become like more streamlined on some of that stuff. And I think the challenge of that is like everybody at Decagon today in this company, it's a super hungry, smart group of people, but everybody at Decagon loves Decagon because you're getting to build Decagon and you're getting to be innovative and stand things up on your own and test things and iterate. And I think we have a very like core startup mindset. And so what's like the challenge I worry about as we scale? There's sort of the infrastructure pieces we'll figure out. I worry most about how do you maintain that like ethos and grit and humility of the team when you're all of a sudden 1,000 people with tons of market traction and all this stuff too. So I think that's like really a hard thing to do. And not an obvious answer into like it will inevitably be different, but how do we make sure we maintain the like best parts of that are the things I think about.
Yeah, that's a really great point. In hypergrowth, the pace of change is like relentless. As we've talked about, like you feel like you're at a new company every few months. And you wrote a really interesting piece on how you think culture is the core infrastructure of every company. How do you think about building that amongst all of the chaos of hypergrowth?
Some people describe themselves as like, what are you as a leader? Like I'm really a culture. I believe in culture as like kind of the foundational infrastructure element and that's because I think of culture, what is culture? When I think about culture, the definition that has always like resonated with me is it's how you behave and make decisions as a team when like none of your leadership is around in some ways. Like what is like the unwritten rules of how you operate and get things done? In that sense, it's very much not like the 4 or 5, mission statements and slogans. It's like the actual like infrastructure of day-to-day. What are the rules that we've established of how we operate as a team? And in that sense, it's funny. I've had some companies talk about how they have strong culture or not strong culture. Like every company has a culture, right? And like sometimes you're really intentional. You can be intentional about that culture or not intentional about that culture. But regardless, there will be some norms that get established in how you operate and work as a team. And so we do spend a lot of time thinking about it. I think first and foremost, you have to have a perspective on there's who you are and who you want to be. And you need to be anchored, because of its inception of Decagon, of Jesse and Ashwin and who we were and how we came to be. Like there is sort of a nodule or a core center of, I think, this team that exists and has like kind of snowballed on itself. And it's really about, do I know what's expected of me? Do I have the capability to do it? Do I have the reinforcing mechanisms and like tools and incentives to do it? And do I have the role modeling? I think those are the 4 kind of pillars. And I think about that. I love that framework for change management, but I actually love it for culture, just like culture also as a whole, because I do think that's how do you set and drive operating behaviors? And so we think a lot about our kind of values and how those translate into like actual operating principles of how we operate. And then, we're doing things like founders awards, related to incentivize that, but also just like the day-to-day modeling. I think I talked about how Jesse and Ashwin, and I think us as a leadership team have to walk the walk, but like the day-to-day modeling of like what we ask of the team, how we expect things to be done, and how do we then go interact with each other, I think really sets that tone and cascades that. And I'll go back to what we talked about at the beginning, talent, who you bring into the company. You really need to, one, make it clear of like the type of people that you're trying to bring in who are going to be a part of this sort of very special thing you're hopefully building. Do they represent and will be people who carry that kind of culture forward? And so there's a lot of things that are embedded in it, but I do think of it really as this, it exists whether you want it to or not. And so you can tweak it, refine it, modify it. But like, I think you have to spend real time thinking about and articulating who it is you want to be, and then leading and guiding the team towards that as well.
How would you advise founders who are first starting to think about this? Let's say they want to be really intentional about the culture that they build. Like, how do they build a culture where they can attract great talent and then give them the space to thrive?
It depends on your, there are different, one of the things I love and don't love about like org design or culture in general is there's no right answer. There's just trade-offs.
Yeah, totally.
And that was it was like one of the sad things for me when I was thinking about doing this work when I was younger, is I was like, oh, maybe I'll get a book one day and it will just articulate to me what a perfect org would look like and how you should design and structure things. And I, very quickly came to appreciate, oh no, there's no right answer. You can have any structure, you can have anything, you're just making trade-offs along that. And so I think you really want to think about, again, the reason founders matter, or they're that sort of nodule core, they are going to define just by virtue of who they are, what their core set is. And so how they act and operate will in all likelihood become like the embodiment of the company that they're going to build. I would say also, sometimes I would say it's worth spending real time on just reflecting on like, how do you operate? How do you want to serve your customers? What kind of a product do you want to be? What type of a team? How do you want to interact with your team? How do you want feedback? Sometimes there's this perception that people who spend time on culture, it's like all going to be soft. And that if you think about how the team executes and operate, you're not going to be a team that drives performance. There's sort of this is like, does being a culture, somebody who's really intentional about how you lead, is that actually one that is going to drive the most performance or best outcomes for the product and market and for their customers ultimately? And I would say yes. And that culture doesn't have to be a soft culture. Like sometimes there's, I don't know if you get this ever, there's this perception that like, oh, if I think a lot about how we should work together and give feedback, like maybe it'll just be sort of this circle of nice things and we actually won't be demanding performance. I actually think that's not true at all. I think intentional cultures often demand like great performance. And that doesn't mean you can't make hard choices about people when you're really intentional about like the culture you're setting. And it helps you hold that bar.
That's a great question in itself, right? Where I do think a lot of founders often think like, okay, we need to build culture. Let's define some values. And often those values are soft. How do you think about just building the ethos of a company? And that is kind of a mixture of both of those things.
Yeah. And values, like, again, culture doesn't mean it's like, oh, we have boba on Friday. Like that doesn't mean we have a great culture, but like, hey, we are like brutally honest about when things are not going well. That's like I do think you have to take values and then really turn them into like, what will that look like? If then statements, how am I actually going to deliver that and drive that? So it's like, we want people who really like deliver on outcomes, and, our culture is one of like performance. We have a culture of performance. So we are going to reward people who really deliver. We're going to make it very clear and known and intentional. People who don't perform, I'm not saying we shame them, but maybe they don't stay at the company for a long time if they're not the right fit.
Making hard decisions.
Yeah, making hard decisions. And so like, you said, how do you kind of drive the ethos of a company? Again, I think it's just, how do you want it to feel? And then how does that translate actually into the behaviors, incentives, processes that you're like structuring as a team?
I would love your thoughts on the whole 996 thing. Because I know this has been a big topic. And I think sometimes, or my advice to founders has been, you want people to innately be driven to solve this problem, build with you, all of these things, rather than dictated to. Because that looks really different, right? If someone's coming in on the weekend building because they're so excited to build Decagon, that looks very different than someone who shows up on Saturday because they're, expected to. What are your thoughts on this?
I think, you talked a lot about something which I think of as like the distinction of like looking for output versus outcome. And I think the reality is like, again, what is the outcome that you're looking for? Right. And can you screen for that? And does that only manifest in 996, or does that actually come out in many different ways and with different people? And I think what we've found is, especially as we've focused on world-class people that can deliver great outcomes, like we have not had to hold to a 996, culture. We kind of talk about how, again, I also even think about in terms of roles that we're hiring today, we think about, does being in the office really drive the better outcome for the team? For some roles, we think it does because it allows for that collaboration. I myself really benefit from being in the office a fair amount, but again, it's not all the time. And so I really try to orient us as a team to focus on the outcomes our team is delivering and not on like hours in seat or widgets spun, et cetera. And I think that's been like way more powerful for us as a team to also attract like world-class talent that is not able to live like in the office in the same way. Because of, again, as you start to hire people that are probably mid to later in career, 996, there is an ability to be available, but like 996 actually doesn't work, and it doesn't really scale at that pace either. So I really encourage people to think about what is the outcome? What are you looking for? Be specific.
What are you trying to solve for?
What are you trying to solve for? And like what's my work schedule today? I work in the office during the day. I go home and with my kids. And then, I do plug in a little bit in the evening to make sure like things are going, we're making decisions. Mostly that I'm not blocking decisions that need to get made. But by the way, that was the same that I did at Splunk, my prior company, other kind of public companies also. So I don't think anything out of the ordinary. So I would say founders that think they have to hold to that are probably doing themselves a disservice in the type of talent bar that they can have. And I would just encourage us to like peel it back and articulate what is the kind of behavior or attribute you're looking for, when you say things like 996 overall. Yeah,
because from a leadership perspective, like you want to bring in people who you can let run, who you can give green space and allow them to be great in the way that they're great.
Yeah, it's funny. One of the things I often ask people if I'm doing like a leadership development training or program, I ask them to think about like what's the best leader they've ever had, and it's really consistent, right? That people will say it was somebody who gave me freedom to run, encouraged me, helped me like have the right capabilities, but really set the parameters. It's like I talk about it like you draw out the garden and where things are grow, but you don't actually dictate exactly how they have to do the planting or something. I think a lot about how, as a leader trying to bring in world-class talent, especially when I'm going after the talent bar that I am, I need to create a space where those people can really, I don't know, I'm not a Gen Z, let them cook. You know what I mean? Like I need them to do their work well, and I need to set that framework for them such that they can be effective and enable them and support them and also set guardrails and guidance. But I'm going to look to you to help frame and shape how does your day look such that you're delivering the most amount of work? Because I'm actually not going to worry if you're here at 9. I'm going to worry if like if we don't get what we need to get done.
Yeah. So the deliverable isn't.
Yeah, I really focus on the deliverable, and I look, again, I think in a world of these companies able to attract really world-class talent, let them be world-class. Let them do the best work and hold them to that standard. I do think if you give a lot of freedom, you also have to hold to standards on performance, because that's how what can happen is you give a ton of freedom and then you don't hold anything on performance. Well, that's not great either. So you have to we have to moderate that. But I do really think about this, help them set the guardrails, hold to performance. And I think if you can do that, you can have really like a magical outcome in terms of what you get in terms of deliverables.
That's a great way to think about it. We talk a lot about recruiting and closing, and I am guilty of this myself as a recruiter. But building early teams and owning the people function at some points myself, I learned just how important the retention piece of this equation is. Otherwise, you're kind of building this insatiable problem for yourself. And it's a huge detriment to the business. How are you thinking about this at Decagon, especially in this market where retention is so key to continuing to build and scale?
Yeah, retention is more important than acquisition, actually, in my mind, because once you've acquired, but actually like if you've then invested all the dollars and resources to have them be a part and then they don't feel like they can be here successfully long-term, I think that's kind of like 2x basically the issue that you've created for yourself. So retention, I think, of the team is like first and foremost. We at Decagon talk about how we want to be a great company, but for our team, we want this to be the greatest phase of their career when they look back. That we want them to feel like this was the time they accomplished the most, they learned the most, they grew the most. And even though there is an inevitable intensity to this hypergrowth, but it's like the period they look back on and they think, wow, that was really the highlight of my career. And I think of that as the guiding light of how we want to think about Decagon. So it's like, do you get to work with great people? Do you get to be your like best self at work and deliver great work yourself? Do you have the ability to learn and develop and grow? Are you working on exciting things? Again, there's no one piece of that. Am I compensated, fairly obviously in that as well too. But I think if you can kind of hit those pieces of you're working with great people, you're delivering great work, you feel like there's momentum and excitement in the company. And by the way, I'm like compensated and fair and I can see myself having a path here. That is like the magic sauce of keeping someone. There's a lot of really interesting studies that are done on like retention actually. And I remember I studied this in grad school. I didn't study grad school for org design, but it was like an economics class. And the number one factor in retention for teams is often like the embeddedness of a person in that team. And so it's counter because you think, oh, it's their compensation, they're this.
Yeah.
But it's actually like, okay, how much do I like my colleagues? Do I like the work I'm doing? Am I like a part of this team, culture, company, community?
Yeah.
And if I really like that, then I'm probably not picking up my head to leave. And if I don't like that, man, that's like hard to be here every day.
Yep.
And so we talk about world-class talent, like world-class people also, just great people to be a part of. Why I personally joined Decagon. And I came in a weird way. I was an advisor initially because I own, ops and people. And so it's sort of a broad function. But when I came in, I was an advisor. And like, what was it that like made me make the curve was like, every person I talked to was like the smartest person I had met in their function ever. And that was really consistent. And that was such a rare, like special thing that I thought about Decagon. And so like, why did I stay? I was like, oh, because the team I really believed in the market and the opportunity of this company to like, be, $100 billion plus organization in a TAM that seemed infinite. But really it was like, oh, I was getting to work with, and I had worked at Mckinsey and these sort of world-class orgs, but like getting to work with some of the smartest people I'd ever met who were humble and hungry and driving. And I thought that was just like such a cool, I just thought I would be up-leveled every day by getting to work with that team. And so I think a lot about that. And so again, like who are you bringing in the door? And when they're not like that, my God, we got to make sure we keep that pool like that and that we keep them energized and focused on everything we're delivering. So you want all of them to join the community, not just like their work self to join the community. And so we think about that too.
You guys really lean into like the love of the product. And in some ways you've built these very unique roles at Decagon that are very specific to you all. That these agentic type roles, whether it be in product or go to market and things like that. Was that an intentional choice because you really want the love of the product to come through?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. We, one of the things I loved about Decagon was like, it's like an appetite for learning as well. And so segue to how this comes together. But, I think our founders and we will go out and try to get the best practices from every other company and founder to give us context so we can actually be as smart as possible at how we go and approach things. The corollary to that though, or like the inverse of that, I would say is we are very cognizant of the fact that like how does SaaS get built and deployed in an AI world is actually quite different than before. Yeah. And so there's also sort of a willingness maybe to, you talk about kind of these specific AI agentic products, is that like, we also know that we kind of have to lead the charge to some extent and how this technology is deployed at customers and how you maintain it. Like that is how you maintain a AI agent is actually a fundamentally different motion than a traditional SaaS offering. And so we've sort of, I think, been very first principles and looked at that and said, oh, actually, maybe it is a different set of roles or capabilities you need to stand up to do that. I think it's one of the most powerful things about Decagon is I think we're trying to understand from the past, but also like very first principles, like everything we do has to make sense for our business. We have to have conviction on it, like on a core logic level versus just, oh, other companies do it this way, therefore we probably need this. Yeah. And so that's how companies like roles and orgs have gotten stood up is, again, we're also very fast to experiment. So we will say, okay, is this right? Is this how you deploy it? We'll spin up like a tiger SWAT team to try it out. And if we get like a lot of any market validation that's right, we'll run pretty hard at it as well.
I wonder also how much of this is like your own background bleeding through of just, you went to Stanford, GSB, you were at McKinsey for a long time in your career, and then made the switch into operations at Splunk and come from the business side. You're not a traditional people leader in some sorts. And I wonder how much your unique vantage point helps you look at the business differently, helps you think about building the people function differently at Decagon.
Yeah, it's interesting. I am not a traditional CPO by any means. I was very kind of painfully aware of that when I came into this role. And so I really view my role, one, is helping kind of build out these functions in a world-class way, because I think I've seen them at different stages of scale, whether that's like, 2,000 people, 1,000, 10,000 people. But then also to your point, helping translate kind of business strategy into actually what does that mean in terms of talent, markets we go after, what are the core parts of infrastructure that we need to stand up given who we're trying to be. And so I view that as kind of my secret sauce in some ways, is how I play that role between those two. Yeah. But then also, hiring, I hired an amazing leader Shannon Spears, shout out to Shannon, to lead people and kind of everything HRBP ops as well, everything on the people side of the house. Because again, I think just as we're building this quickly, we need to have some of these core elements of infrastructure built out underneath. And same thing on the talent side. So we have a great talent team who does this. Again, I'm super involved in talent acquisition because obviously there's nothing more important, but like the mechanics of like the talent stack, the HRS stack, I mean, those are not my deep expertise. So I try to always be as a leader very aware of like where I can add value and where I can't and not be embarrassed about that. The reality I think is you get to any scale, in any role, there's like a turning point where inevitably you didn't lead every function that reports into you. There's no way for those people don't exist. And so you sort of come to, that happened at Splunk a bunch. And so I came to just accept that I would be somebody who could help first principles and also to be like aware and humble when I don't have the right expertise, but help the team get that if they need it.
I think it adds recruiting and talent, especially when you understand the business and know the business deeply and have those relationships can make it so much more effective. And so clearly it's a huge advantage for Decagon to have you. I think in some ways you were an early pioneer in this shift from, I feel like we've seen this trend of a lot of consulting folks move into operating, especially in AI the last few years. What do you think of this trend and what do you think that it's doing for company building overall?
I spent my earlier part of my career at McKinsey. I like a lot of focus on org, but on go-to-market also, but in tech, kind of always in the space of SaaS. And I loved it. I learned so much. And again, I think really was like an amazing training ground for me to understand how to tackle problems and complex problems. I mean, really, I think about at the end of the day, what does consulting teach you? It's how to kind of go in and break down any complicated problem into its like distinct parts and then align an org or kind of set of solutions against that, which is very valuable, I think, anywhere else. When I was in consulting, I then made the shift and realized actually I didn't want to just manage projects at some point. I actually wanted to be an operator and like be in the day-to-day of a company.
Okay, Chloe, give us your hot takes. What is your most overrated or underrated leadership principle?
Common sense. Common sense is the most underrated thing at any level of team, I believe. And I so hunger for common sense sometimes and stuff, which for me is just like, take a beat and think about it. And is that right? I have so many times I've had teams come to me panicked about something and I'm like, somehow we reframed it. And I'm like, I don't think I did anything super amazing. And I just sort of said like, hey, does that actually make sense? Is this kind of those? So common sense, I think, is super underrated. Always having all the answers. And so I think often, especially as you get more senior or things get more complicated, you need to spend a lot of time seeking to understand whether that's something didn't go well, something did go well. Again, you'll have, as you're further away, you'll be further removed from these problems. I do think, though, maybe another underrated thing is sometimes people get too or they think this is above their pay grade. So like a willingness to roll up your sleeves and go deep and really dive in, I think is super underrated sometimes. Yeah. And like that's, it's not a good use of my time or, you kind of hear these things. It's not a good use of my time or like, I don't, need to go look at that. I'm like, often I think you get a lot of insight going really, and sometimes I don't do this enough either, where like I'm really busy and I don't go deep enough. And I think being willing to go like really deep and get in the weeds and like really understand is kind of underrated sometimes. That doesn't mean you should micromanage. I'm talking about, it sounds like I'm something on the cusp of micromanagement, but there's something really powerful about a leader who's like, I think modeling that they're willing to like pick up the phone, maybe dare I say it, schedule a call, whatever it is to go do that. I think that models a lot for their team as well. So like willing to dive in, roll up your sleeves, be humble and just kind of look at it closely, I think is really underrated.
No, totally. Being on the other side of it, right? Like being the person who is working for a leader, like a leader who really understands your job day to day and understands like the challenges you face and the things that you're doing well. It only makes your job better and makes communication better and helps you be more effective, right?
Completely.
I think it builds a lot of like cohesivity within a team if there's understanding like mutually,
understanding.
right?
And I think when things don't go right, it's really easy to be like, oh, why did you mess up or don't do that again? Versus like, okay, what is it about how we operate that led to a mistake? Kind of agnostic of the person or the thing. In fact, we often want to attribute errors to a person, but often I think it's much more related to the context around them. And so I think that's really important to understand and kind of seek to understand and then help the team work through. Completely. Talent is a team sport. Yeah. And it's not it isn't one And, if all of a sudden, I also think about sometimes, if something's been going well and then all of a sudden it stops going well, it's probably not just
that person
just messed it up. Like something has changed, and has the market moved from compensation? Is our brand, okay, we're at a different stage, and again, like I said earlier, Decagon's a different company every 2 months. So like inevitably the things that land well with candidates 2 months ago, it's like different it is this month. And, even just, it's just been really interesting to see this evolution. So it's something you have to constantly be, very curious to be good at this job in a way, because you have to constantly be diagnosing kind of all the different pieces that drive to why somebody chooses to be here, and look at that all the time.
I think that is very underrated. Being curious, just in any job, but especially as a leader.
Being curious, I think that's a really good point. Yeah. It's one of the things we screen for with recruiters, actually, is just like, what's your general curiosity? You ask a lot of questions, or you're trying to understand the product, the business. I think because that's going to be somebody who's curious about candidates, who's also going to help get to the right answer versus just trying to like go through the motions. So
exactly. Kind of in that same vein, like what is the best leadership advice that you have ever received?
One thing that my very good friend and mentor of mine, Gary Steele, who's the CEO of Splunk, kind of told me, I think when I joined him was, how do you got a million things? How do you think about your day? And he's like, I just spend my time on where I am uniquely positioned to move the business forward. And that is like the big priority for me. And I think about that a lot of like, how do I do my priorities? Like, am I uniquely positioned such that I need to be involved in this? And will this actually move the needle meaningfully for the company as well? And if that's not the case, then I try to spend time elsewhere or reprioritize and stuff. It's amazing how often, if you look at how people are spending their time, it is probably not aligned to what they think are the biggest priorities. And so that's like a general filter I use for how I think about like my time, my team's time as well. That doesn't mean like the details don't matter and things, but like as we scale, there are people who are going to help run the mechanic. And again, when things are broken, I need to spend time there. I'm not saying that's not valuable, but where am I spending time such that it will move the business forward? I think is something I think about a lot.
That's so powerful because it also gives a green space to your team to be able to do the same thing for themselves of like, what am I uniquely positioned to add to this team, to add to this company? And it's a great framework for everyone to use. Well, Chloe, thank you for spending the afternoon with us. We really appreciate it. And all of your insights. And we'll always be cheering you and Decagon on. We can't wait to see what else you guys do.
Awesome. We're excited. If anybody wants to join, we're growing like crazy. So please come.
Reach out to Chloe and her team.
Yes.